Welcome to True Crime Deep Dive. I am your host, Sherry.
I'm your host, Mark.
Let's dive into it. Ever get that shiver down your spine just thinking about how even when someone tries to, totally erase a murder like it never happened, nature or even our own tech steps in to reveal the truth?
It's a chilling thought, isn't it?
It really is. And today we're looking at 3 cases, 3 different investigations where it seemed like the victims would stay nameless forever.
Yeah, you see, in these cases, the killer thinks if they can just get rid of the victim's identity, the whole investigation goes nowhere.
Exactly. And you've brought some fascinating, albeit pretty disturbing, cases where it seemed impossible at first. But, incredible forensic work, some really unexpected uses of technology. It all helped bring those victim stories to light and ultimately expose the killers.
Absolutely.
So let's break down just how they did it. What were those incredible methods, those breakthroughs? Where do we even begin?
Well, our first case takes us to Sauk County, Wisconsin, July 30th, 1999. Picture this. A hiker, out with her son, comes across a plastic grocery bag near the Wisconsin River. And inside, a skeletal hand.
Okay, a hand in a grocery bag. That's already sending chills down my spine. Sounds like someone trying hard to hide something awful.
Oh, it gets worse. Sadly, searching the riverbank turned up more trash bags, this time with other body parts, a head, torso, arms, all belonging to a woman. But what really got to the investigators was the way the body was handled. The face and scalp, they were carefully removed, placed in a separate bag, and the severing at the shoulders, incredibly precise.
When you say precise, it makes you think of someone with, a disturbing kind of skill. So how do you even begin to identify someone with no face, no obvious clues? What were the first steps?
The medical examiner, they did their best. Estimated the victim was somewhere between 5'1" and 5'3", probably 18 to 25 years old, and she'd been dead for at least 5 days. The first thing they tried, of course, fingerprints. Ran them through the FBI database, hoping for a quick match. No luck.
Dead end right from the start. No fingerprints, no face. How do you even start? Sending the head for facial reconstruction, I assume that was off the table.
You're right. The problem was the soft tissue still on the skull. It had important biological evidence. Traditional reconstruction working directly on the skull, it would have damaged all that. They needed a totally new approach, and they found it, believe it or not, by teaming up with the Milwaukee School of Engineering.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. Engineers solving a murder mystery. I'm hooked. Tell me more.
Right. There's these engineers, they suggested using a CAT scan on the severed head. Their idea was to create a detailed 3D model from the scan. And then they could use this incredible technology called rapid prototyping, what most people know as 3D printing, to make a replica of the skull.
So they 3D printed a skull? Out of what?
Paper, actually. It's amazing. They usually use this tech in engineering, building prototypes, finding flaws in designs, but using it in a forensic investigation. Groundbreaking stuff.
Okay, I have to ask, how do you 3D print a paper skull?
It's pretty wild. They take the 3D model and slice it digitally into tons of these super thin layers, like 2-dimensional slices. Then a laser cuts out each layer from sheets of paper, and then they just stack and glue those layers together, one by one, until, boom, you have a full 3D replica. Kind of like building with really, really precise paper blocks.
Wow, that's incredible. They basically gave this victim a voice again, using a tool meant for, designing cars and stuff. What happened next? Did they try to put a face on this paper skull?
Exactly. They sent the replica to Dr. Emily Craig, a brilliant forensic artist at the Kentucky State Crime Lab. And she had this crazy challenge to perform a facial reconstruction on a paper skull. She even said at the time it was totally unheard of in the U.S. using a prototype skull like this to try and ID a victim.
Okay, but how do you even begin to put a face on a paper skull? It sounds so delicate.
Well, Dr. Craig started by putting these tissue depth markers on the skull. Those show, on average, how thick the skin should be at certain points on the face, depending on race, age, sex. Before anything else, she carefully placed prosthetic eyes, the right size and all, based on the skull.
Because the eyes, they're so important for recognition, right?
Exactly. And then she started sculpting. Used oil-based clay to model the facial muscles, the tissues. And she's blending hard science with real artistry here, forming the lips, the nose, the eyelids.
Must have taken forever. Did they get a recognizable face?
After hours and hours of work, a face did emerge. They took photos of it, lots of angles, and sent the clay model back to the police in Sauk County. Then, the photos were released to the media, hoping someone, somewhere, would recognize her.
And someone did, right?
Yeah.
It's got to be the moment everyone's holding their breath for.
It was. Weeks went by, And then a woman named Cher called the police. She thought the face in the poster looked a lot like a woman named Muo Kaza, 25 years old, a student from Tanzania. Muo had come to the U.S. to study English, and she was related to Cher's ex-husband, a man named Peter Kupaza.
So finally, a name and a connection right here in the States. What did Cher know about Mu? Did it give them any leads?
Cher told the police that Muo had lived with her and Peter for a while, and during that time, Peter was abusive towards Muo, even raped her multiple times. Eventually, Mu decided to go back to Tanzania. Cher herself had left Peter because of the abuse. It's a terrible situation, just awful what Muo went through.
Awful. But if Muo was planning to go home, why didn't she? And what did Peter say when they asked him about Muo?
Well, they talked to some neighbors who knew Muo, and they agreed the reconstructed face looked like her. But Peter, he denied everything. Said he didn't recognize the face, that Muo had gone back to Tanzania, even that he talked to her dad and she was fine.
I bet that story fell apart pretty quickly.
Oh, it did. When they contacted Muo's family in Tanzania, her father told them Muo never came home. They hadn't heard from her in ages. So Peter's story was a lie. And then they found out something else about Peter. He used to work as a butcher.
That explains the way the body was, so precisely dismembered. Horrible. So they had a possible ID, and Peter was looking suspicious. How did they prove Muo's identity? For sure.
Muo's medical records were the key. They tracked down her doctor, got her files. Luckily, she had given fingerprints during a routine checkup. They compared those prints to the ones from the hand in the bag. Perfect match. They finally had a name for the faceless woman, Muo Kaza.
That's got to be a huge relief, even in the midst of such a terrible crime. Now it's all about getting Peter.
Absolutely. Peter was still denying everything. He even said he didn't have any photos of Muo. But guess what? Cher found 3 pictures of her in his photo album. And you know what? They matched Dr. Craig's reconstruction perfectly. And then, during a search of Peter's place, they found bloodstains in his bathroom. DNA testing confirmed it was Muo's blood.
The evidence was piling up. What was his motive? Why go through all that to silence Muo?
It seemed like Muo was going to expose Peter, tell everyone about the abuse. He probably wanted to shut her up for good.
And in the end?
Peter was convicted. First-degree murder, sentenced to life in prison. It's a case that really shows you the power of forensic science, how they can take something that seems impossible, like identifying a victim with no face, and use creativity and technology to get justice.
It's a remarkable story. From a hand in a grocery bag to a life sentence. Let's move on to our second case, this time in the Arizona desert. This one involves a body, a cowboy hat with a bullet hole, and a pair of glasses.
This one starts in Tonto National Forest near Phoenix, Arizona on February 17, 1996. A hunter finds a body, decomposed, a white male with a single gunshot wound to the back of the head. And just like the Wisconsin case, no ID. The body was too far gone to make out any facial features.
So another mystery. No name, no face. What clues do they have to work with?
Well, there was that gunshot wound, of course. And then they found a cowboy hat near the body with a bullet hole right through the brim. And there were a pair of prescription glasses, too. They also noticed mud on the victim's clothes. It hadn't rained in a while, so they figured the body had been there for some time.
Okay, so they had an idea of the timeline, but still no ID. What did the medical examiner find out?
They said the cause of death was a close-range gunshot to the head. They estimated the victim was between 45 and 55 years old, about 6 feet tall, took fingerprints, ran them through the system, nothing. Checked missing persons reports, no match. It was frustrating, hitting a wall with all the usual methods.
I can imagine. So what do they do next? How do you crack a case when all the obvious leads go cold?
Well, they turned to a different kind of expert, a forensic artist at the Glendale Police Department named John Wintrow. This guy was a whiz with computer software, reconstructing faces from photos, even when the remains were in bad shape.
Hold on, using computer software to rebuild a decomposed face, how is that even possible?
It's pretty cool, actually. But first, Wintrow had to take detailed photos of the victim's face. He used a special technique called the Franker plane, a very specific way of taking photos to make sure the image is accurate and consistent. Think of it like a standardized headshot, but for a deceased person. He also photographed the hat and glasses, making sure to include a ruler in the photos for accurate scaling later on.
Why were the hat and glasses so important to photograph so carefully?
Because the plan was to digitally add those to the reconstructed face later. They figured it might help someone recognize him, those little personal touches. As for the reconstruction itself, Wintrow scanned all the photos into his software. His main job was to get rid of the decomposition, digitally, of course.
So like a digital cleanup job, erasing the damage to see the face underneath.
That's a good way to put it. He used the software to find undamaged areas of skin, and then, using something called cloning, he copied those good areas over the damaged parts. Then he smoothed everything out, blended the skin tones, until the image looked like, well, a normal face, no decomposition. And then, the final touch, he added the hat and glasses.
And that was it. That's how they identified him.
You're not going to believe this. Just hours after they released the image to the media, a guy named John Christian calls the police. He recognized the man in the picture. Thomas Donahue, 52 years old, worked as a security guard. Christian knew Donahue through a friend at a grocery store and said he hadn't seen him in weeks. Just like that, they had a name.
That's amazing. From a nameless body to a name, all thanks to some computer magic. So who was Donahue, and how did they figure out who killed him?
Christian told the police that Donahue lived with a woman named Darlene Schlick, and that he hung out with a group of people involved in, well, some shady stuff, like forgery. He also mentioned that another member of the group, Carrie Scott, seemed to have a grudge against Donahue. And when they checked, Donahue hadn't been to work in weeks. They took fingerprints from the body and confirmed it was Thomas Donahue.
Darlene Schlick and Carrie Scott. Sounds like they went straight to the top of the suspect list. What happened next?
They found Darlene pretty quickly. She had just been arrested for, you guessed it, forgery. Carrie was harder to find, but they eventually caught her hiding in a motel room. At first, Carrie denied everything, but she finally broke down and said that Darlene had shot Donahue. Apparently, he knew too much about their forgery operation, but then another associate, Erica Land, gave a different story, said Carrie was the one who pulled the trigger. In the end, Darlene admitted that she and Carrie had planned the whole thing.
Wow, so much lying and backstabbing, all because of some forged documents. Why kill Donahue, though? Seems extreme.
They were scared Donahue would rat them out to the police, simple as that.
And so, what happened to Darlene and Carrie?
They were both convicted, sentenced to life in prison. It's pretty clear that the facial reconstruction was the key. It led them to Donahue's identity and then to the killers.
Another case closed thanks to some clever use of forensic science. It's amazing how technology can give a voice back to the victims even when someone tries so hard to erase them. Our last case today takes us to Texas, 1989. We're talking about a skull wrapped in cloth found near a lake.
This one is a bit grim. It starts on July 18, 1989, near Willow Lake in Wills Point, Texas. A young boy, just playing around, stumbles upon a human skull wrapped in cloths. Right away, investigators found more blue denim shorts, some rope with knots, a few strands of red hair. The skull was pretty decomposed, suggested it had been out in the elements for at least a year. And there were signs of blunt force trauma, definitely a murder. Initial analysis told them the victim was a Caucasian female, maybe between 20 and 40 years old, with red hair.
A skull, some scattered belongings. It's hard to imagine how you even begin to untangle a case like that. Did they find any more remains?
Sadly, yes. Not far from the skull, they found part of a skeleton, and it was wrapped in chicken wire, tied with electrical wire and roped to concrete blocks. Someone really tried hard to sink those remains in the lake. And guess what? The knots on that rope matched the ones found with the skull.
It's like a signature, a way of connecting the pieces. The chicken wire, the concrete blocks, it all sounds very planned out. Did they have any suspects?
As they looked around the area, they found something interesting in a nearby house. Ropes, the same type, tied with the same knots. It turned out the house belonged to an elderly couple and their son, Ronald Mark Holloway, 38 years old. And when they ran his name, well, it turned out Holloway was on parole for sexual assault and attempted murder. And get this, he had actually talked about wanting to dismember someone and dump the body in water before.
Uh-oh, that's not good. With his history and that evidence at his house, Holloway must have been the prime suspect. Did he admit to anything?
He said he tied the knots, but that was it. He denied everything else. But there was a problem. Texas had these speedy trial laws back then, meaning they had to build a case against him fast. And to do that, they needed to identify the victim.
So the clock was ticking.
Yeah.
What did they do? Another facial reconstruction.
Exactly. They brought in Karen Taylor, a forensic artist. She used tissue depth markers, those things that tell you the average thickness of skin at certain points based on race and stuff. And she used some scientific formulas to figure out the facial features. Then she made a sketch. The blue jean shorts they found, they were a size 26, so she drew the victim as slender.
And this sketch, did it work? Did anyone recognize her?
It did. Just hours after they showed the sketch on the news, someone called in with a tip. They thought the picture looked like a woman named Jennifer D. Weaker, 28 years old, lived with her boyfriend, Ray Dawson, in a town nearby. And when they showed the sketch to Dawson, he said yes, it was definitely Jennifer.
Finally, a name. That must have been a huge break in the case. How did they prove it for sure?
Dental records. They compared Jennifer's dental records to the teeth from the skull, and it was a match. The remains belonged to Jennifer Weaker.
So they had their victim. What about Holloway? Did they have enough to connect him to Jennifer?
Well, someone from Jennifer's neighborhood, a clerk at a convenience store, remembered seeing her getting into Holloway's truck around the time she disappeared. Holloway, of course, kept denying he knew Jennifer, but the investigators, they figured Holloway's past, his violence towards women, it all pointed to him.
And that was enough to convict him?
Yes. Ronald Mark Holloway was convicted of Jennifer Weaker's murder in January 1990. Got a sentence of 25 years to life. In this case, that sketch, that one piece of forensic art, was what cracked the case wide open. It gave Jennifer her name back and helped put her killer behind bars.
3 cases, all so different, and yet all with a similar thread running through them. We had a faceless woman, a badly decomposed body, scattered remains, all these attempts to hide the victims, to protect the killers. It's chilling to think about.
What's really amazing to me is how forensic science, in all its forms, was the hero. 3D printing, computer software, good old-fashioned artistic skill, it all played a role in solving these cases.
And it wasn't just fancy technology either. It was those little aha moments, those flashes of insight that made the difference. A neighbor recognizing a face, a bullet hole in a hat, some knots on a rope. Those small details, combined with science and dedication, were what brought justice.
It's a powerful reminder that even when someone tries to silence a victim forever, erase their very existence, there are people fighting to give them back their voice. Forensic science never gives up.
It makes you wonder, what's next? What amazing breakthroughs are waiting around the corner? How will we use technology and ingenuity to solve the unsolvable? It's both exciting and a little bit scary to think about, but one thing's for sure, the truth has a way of coming out, even when buried deep.
That certainly does.
And that's what makes these stories so compelling. Thanks for bringing these cases to light. Until next time, keep those minds curious.
New episodes are going to be released every Tuesday and Friday.
Simple but essential.
Simple but essential information for staying up to date.
Foundational piece of knowledge.
You got it. And with that knowledge, you can engage with our content on your own terms, on your own schedule.
That's the beauty of it.
That's right. So with that in mind, think about this now that you know exactly when to tune in.
Think about the future.
What burning questions do you have out there?
Yeah, what topics are you hoping we'll explore in future deep dives?
What sources are just sitting in your archives, just waiting to be unpacked?
We're ready.
Waiting to have their secrets revealed.
Send them our way.
Send them our way. We're always ready for our next dive.
Always.
Guided by your curiosity.
Yeah.
So until then, keep diving.
Happy listening.
And we'll see you soon.
See you next time.
Take care.
Bye.